Another item that I can relate to you maybe is, since I never grew up with a brother of my own. I think perhaps Ed Hammer has been as close to a brother to me as any school buddy I've ever had throughout all my school years, even to the present. We were involved in everything from sports, biking, sledding, to fishing and singing and motorhoming together. I regret that his health today won't allow him to continue any of these things, but I'm really blessed in having reasonably good health up to now, with so many of my old friends and relatives with disabilities or who are no longer around. Ed and I and another cousin, Rex Bonner, used to go over to Grand River, over by Davis City, about 7 miles away, when we were first married and living in Namoni, all young marrieds. We'd go over there after we got off work. I was working at the college. Ed was working for his father-in-law, Uncle Bud, at the Chevrolet garage. And me to go over there and go fishing in the evening, late evening. If we were lucky, we'd get home at a reasonable time, but if not, we'd stay half the night waiting for the fish to bite. Sitting on the river bank with a fire, nice warm fire to give us some light and tell each other stories. I really miss going fishing back there, where there are more fish than fishermen. Now, when I first got my driver's license, or maybe even before, Ed's dad and mine both had 1937 Plymouth sedans. Oh, were we proud of those. We were just boys who were boys, taking chances that we tell our kids not to take. The North Park in Lamoni used to be a golf course, but in the winter it was covered with ice and snow. Nobody played golf, of course, then. One day the fairways were covered with a sheet of ice. It's like a skating rink, and we got both of those Plymouths up there away from our folks. And we went up to the park and played chicken. We'd head toward each other and then spin out, avoiding what could have been a very embarrassing result. Luckily, we didn't do any damage. Well, another time, one Sunday night, while my parents were in church, we used to go to church on Sunday night. Sometimes I'd not go with my folks. He and I borrowed Dad's car for a quick spin down to the state line about 3 miles away. And I got it back into its original parking place before church was out, with the hood very warm. I think the cat was out of the bag, and I don't want to remember the consequences. So, as Paul Harvey would say, now you know the rest of the story. I'll now fast forward to the later years that included you 5 children, 15 grandchildren, and 1 great-great-grandchild. You know that our activities nowadays include motorhoming to visit you and the grandkids and piling up frequent flyer miles going back and forth to Kauai. Well, I did some calculating. In 19 years since we got our time over in Kauai, we've traveled 190,000 miles. We spent 1,064 days in Kauai during that 19 years, trying to learn how to pronounce Kapa'a, Wailua, Hanamalu, Lehui, Nawilibali, Kaloa, Poipu, Kalaheo, Kukuilono, Hanapepi, Waimea, Kikaha, Hanalei, Hyena, Kilauea, Waialeale, Anahola, Kilohana, Puhi, and Mele Kalikimaka. Aloha. Of blankets to keep warm. The only source of heat was the stairs. Dad had a barber competitor who lived across the street. They had 2 grown daughters living with them. One used to babysit me, but was afraid of the dark, so I would walk her home across the street when she returned. In later years, I had several jobs. A Lamoni-based grocery chain, now called Hy-Vee in southern Iowa, had a bakery in town, and I got a job there, punching down large tubs of raised bread dough, then lifting large armloads onto tables where it was cut and put into baking pans. I went to work early, as do most bakers. One early morning, we heard a lot of noise across the street at our neighbors. A little later, we heard the city fire whistle blow, and then heard shots fired. Our neighbor had become deranged and tried to shoot his 2 daughters, wife, and son-in-law. We watched him come out of the door and saw him reload his shotgun by the light of the street light and go back inside and fire again. Result, he killed his wife and himself. The others barricaded themselves in a bedroom. I had been hunting a few days before this tragedy, but hadn't remembered I had a shotgun on our back porch until it was all over. I'm glad I didn't remember. The emotions from the tragedy remained in my memory for years, and it affected my dad so deeply that we moved to another house in town. While I think of some more memories to record, I'll give Mama a turn to say some things.
Christmas 1875 was a very special Christmas for me. We were spending the Christmas in Ron and Linda's home in Loomis, and my folks were with us. And at that time, I was presented a wonderful gift from them, a little small album containing pictures of the homes that we lived in when I was growing up. It's meant a lot to me. The inscription says, "To Marge, some memories of years gone by. With love, Mother and Dad." And it was their Christmas gift of 1975. As I look at the pictures, I will try to recall the various things that I remember about that time of living in that home. Now the first one is of the home that I was born in. The address was 3104 Cherokee Street. And Mother's writing on the back says, where Marjorie Maxine Kelly was born at 12:20 a.m. September 15th, 1922. Now, as I understand it, if I remember right, this home was my Grandma Kelly's. Her boys had bought it for her to live in. She was widowed very young, when she was about 50 years old, and from then on was dependent upon her boys and girls to furnish a home for her. She mostly lived with us because Dad was supported her more than the others were able to. So I grew up with my Grandma Kelly very much in evidence. I was born in a home, and that is very special to me, as sometimes nowadays the in-home births are so important because of the family involvement. The next home was at 1908 Division Street, which is Avenue L now. And Mother's comment, we moved here when the place on Cherokee was put up for sale in 1924. So I was only 2 years old, so I don't remember this home at all. But I'm glad a picture was taken of it. Now the next home that's featured is 2123 2nd Street, or Avenue G. We lived here when Eris started to school. We always called it the Wareheim House. That was the home where I started having memories. You know, in those days, some mayor decided that it would be easier to find your way around in Fort Madison, a town of only about 15,000, if the streets were lettered A, B, C, which took away some of the beauty of like Cherokee Street and the other Indian names that they had. I wish they had kept it the way it had started out, or the way that it was when Mother was growing up. They always called places after the first owner, I guess, and this, as I said, was called the Wareheim Place. At the time that we lived there, a brick street was being erected out in front, and they had piled the bricks up on the curbs. And I used to go out there and make a little nest for myself out of bricks and sit there and watch them work. And would you believe that I would get a piece of tar, which was put as between the bricks to seal the bricks to the street, and chew on it. I don't know what tar contained, maybe grizzled for all I know, but I guess it didn't hurt me any. The next memory I have of this home, too, is this is where Eris started to school. And I remember there was a street between our street and where the school was, which was just about a block away. One time it had rained so hard that the street had flooded. So Dad took Eris to school, and I tagged along to where I was at the curb, and he was wading what to me looked like a river to take Eris across the street to go to school. This was Jefferson School, and I remember at that school I played marbles, and there was a ridge around the school that I would put, it was about 2 feet up, I suppose, And then there was another place where you could put your hands, and you would put your feet on the ridge and put your hands above you and try to go around all of the school there without falling down on the ground, which wasn't that far away. The next home was called the Kip House, 2511 Avenue I. That's where we lived when Milton was born, and we moved there in 1927, as Mother says, and that's where I started the school. Some memories of that home is sitting, the sidewalk went from the front door down to the sidewalk, and there were some steps there, and I would sit there and daydream. I remember watching ants and just enjoying my childhood years. At this particular home, Eris and I had the side bedroom on the east. And that's the home I remember of where I remember the shift robe that Pam now has. And it contained all of our clothes. Would you believe that? The house didn't have many closets. It was also where I remember wearing long underwear, wool underwear that stretched out when it was washed. So to make it go around my ankles, I had to wind it around and then put on these horrible black and white stockings. And I hated them like with a passion. My folks had the front bedroom. And the memory I have of it is when a child was born to my Aunt Gladys named Hale Marvin. And in those days they called them blue babies. And he didn't live very long, but the night that he was born and my mother went over there and left Eris and I at home. Evidently Dad was out on the road. So Eris and I were there by ourselves, and we got to sleep in their bed, and that was a real treat. And that was the first time that I had gone to a funeral of a baby, and being so small. My Aunt Pearl had a room there, a bedroom. Remember, she had a beautiful quilt on her bed. She was orphaned very young, and after being shipped out to my great Aunt Pearl in California, she couldn't get along there very well. She was a very mixed up little girl, and Aunt Pearl had some ruffian boys, so that didn't last very long. So she went back to Iowa, and from there went on to Chicago, where my Aunt Irene was working, which was her older sister, as a waitress in a restaurant that Uncle George was the chef there. So Pearl and Irene worked there as waitresses, and then Irene married George. Well, it didn't work out for Pearl to stay there, so she came and she lived a lot of her life with us, the same as Grandma Kelly did. Mother always made room for anyone that needed it, including my Uncle Marion, who sometimes slept in the bedroom. Eventually, a farm family took him on as a farm hand, where he learned his farming skills. The Depression occurred when we were living in the Kip House, and the folks could no longer afford to pay the rent there. That's why we lived in so many homes. They didn't own a home, and they would rent it and then sort of upgrade it, and then the owner would decide to sell it, of course. So the folks would have to move. But this move was precipitated by the fact of they weren't able to meet the rent. And this home was called the R.G. Livingston home. It was 3001 Avenue H. Mother's comment: moved here during the Depression because we could get it for $15 a month. And also her comment said Marjorie was baptized while we lived there. My memories of this place is that it had outdoor plumbing, and there was a porch onto the back of the house where Mother would put a big round wash tub, and that's where we had our baths. She had a kerosene stove, packed green beans. I pitted a lot of cherries there for canned cherries, which we called thickened cherries. And these thickened cherries, Eris and I took to school, which was the Jefferson School, in a little jar, and were the envy of our classmates because we had these thickened cherries, which really was like cherry pie without the crust. Also, I started taking piano lessons then, and we had this upright piano. My teacher was like a Mary Poppins type, except she wasn't nice. She would put her clock on the piano, and she would only teach me as long as the clock was at the half hour that she was supposed to teach. Needless to say, I didn't look forward to those lessons. I started into what was a little yellow songbook. Really, it wasn't any beginning thing, so I was trying to read like 4 parts at once, and it wasn't always the easiest thing to know what to do. Another memory of this place is that I went to a movie on Saturday afternoon. They had movies then for incense, westerns and whatever. This happened to be a movie about divers. I never had seen a diving outfit before, so I was very frightened by the fact that when the man dived into water with his huge outfit on, it went glug, 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 which I thought he was dying. I didn't know that was necessary for all this equipment, and I thought he was dying, and I had nightmares about that for a long time. The outdoor plumbing. We caught rainwater to shampoo our hair. And I remember we were so poor at that time. Mother had a black dress, and she wore that every Sunday to church. Mother was quite a seamstress. Now I'm going back to the kit place, because I just remembered something about it I would like to talk about. It is the sewing room that Mother had there. She had a treadle sewing machine, and in that room was a sewing machine and a phonograph player. And Eris and I used to go in there. It had hardwood floor, and Eris and I would go in there and dance to Tiptoe Through the Tulips. Also, since it was a wood floor, Mother would wax it. I remember one time when Anna Reen came from the visit from Chicago, she would sit at one end of the room with her knees bent and her feet, so we could put our feet up to hers, and she would push us across the room, and that way the room got a nice polished job. Next place we lived in was a back apartment upstairs. There used to be a grocery store below, but it had been vacant for some time. And the reason we moved there was because, for some reason, I guess maybe the Livingston place sold, Mother said, moved here because our girls didn't want to change schools. And this was also during the Depression in 1932. My memories of this place is that since the store below was vacated, there were water bugs that would come up, and when we would turn on a light in a room, especially the kitchen, they would scatter. Can you imagine how that must have disturbed your Grandma Kelly? It even disturbed me. I remember on this place, we would come home from school and Mother would be fixing up a picnic lunch. We would take it out to the woods where we would have it, and roasted marshmallows and found geodes and cracked them open, and really a very nice memory I have of going out in the woods and having a picnic. Another memory is Milton deciding to go down to where Dad worked across the railroad tracks on his bicycle. Now she mentions later on that Milton learned to ride a bicycle. I remember how worried they were about Milton. Couldn't find him. Then somebody spotted him and he was down several blocks and on his way to see his dad at Shopton, because he knew that's where his dad was working on the railroad. From the apartment, Mother's comment, from the apartment on Avenue I in the 2100 block, we moved to the Lawler property. Here's where we had the indoor bed. They call them Murphy beds now. We liked it here very much, although we were crowded, she says. Grandma Kelly was with us, and much of the time Pearl lived here when the girls were in junior high. This was a neat home, that indoor bed. Aunt Pearl slept on it. I think Grandma Kelly slept on a cot in the dining room. And I don't know, there must have been 2 bedrooms. Maybe Milton slept on the cot in the dining room and Grandma had the bedroom. But anyway, this was a neat home. I remember the porch went to one side. And we had a porch swing there, and I'd love to sit out there during a thunderstorm with a blanket over my head and listen to the thunder and the lightning, just enjoying the outdoors. This was one place, the only place that we had a dog when I was growing up. It didn't last very long because Dad insisted that dogs belonged in the country, not in the city. He was tied to a peg out in the yard, and of course spent most of his time barking because he was an unhappy dog. So we didn't have him very long. Also at this place, I can remember Mother got new rugs. They weren't the wall-to-wall carpeting, they were very pretty rugs, and they fit the living room and the dining room. Going in from the living room to the dining room, the stool posts were very picturesque. I probably didn't notice them being pressed at that time, but now they seem to me. Also, I remember when Mother got the rugs, she was so thrilled to be getting them that I remember rolling around on the carpet. Also, this is where my dad had been laid off railroad and had started selling insurance. I remember he also stopped smoking, so he would chew gum instead, and that's where I became acquainted with blackjack gum and clove gum. Large groceries, and Mother would write out a list wanted. She would put on the list a nice solid head of lettuce. Another would be a hand of bananas. And this must have been a very kindly man that ran the store during the Depression. Always have the money to pay for groceries. It was at this home that I remember staying up one New Year's Eve. We never celebrated New Year's Eve because that's when my mother's mother passed away, so it wasn't a time of celebration. But I was so curious about New Year's Eve that I convinced Mother that I would like to stay up and see it come in, probably to hear some of the whistles or the bells rings or something like that. So I remember going in the dining room, and I had lit a candle, and I sat at the dining room table and waited for the new year to appear. Of course, when it did appear, I heard the whistles and bells, and then I was satisfied to go on to bed, and that was the first New Year's Eve I ever remember staying up. Another memory of this house is that I had a bad cold and a sore throat, and I got up and I couldn't talk, so I was trying to convince Mother that I needed to stay home from school. We had to walk to school, and this is when it was like 20 below zero, and we were all bundled up with just our eyes showing, and I really wasn't feeling very good at all. But she'd almost decided to let me stay home from school, and my brother did something that aggravated me so that I yelled at him, and my voice came out. So therefore I had to stay home from school. Going back to the home, the one called the Kip Place, we had some neighbors that were childless, and they really thought a lot of my sister and I. And I can remember going over to their place, and in their basement, the wife was making soap and using lye, and that's the first time I ever saw anyone make soap. Also, he thought so much of me that he gave me a little mirror that he got at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1905. Mr. Robinson played the ukulele, and I remember going and hearing him, and Dad was on the guitar playing. I don't remember him especially playing the fiddle at this time, but I do remember they had kind of a little combo group going, and I remember that very well. And now I want to go back to the apartment that we lived in, because I just thought of something that I would like to share about it. There was a nunnery across the street from us, a whole Catholic complex there, school, nunnery, and church and hospital. Well, I had heard that the nuns shaved their heads under these big voluminous headgear that they wore, and I was curious as to see what happened at night when they went to bed. So I would look out this particular window, hoping that they would forget to pull the shades, so I could check out to see if they had shaved their heads. Also, another memory about this place is the church bell there at the Catholic Church would toll when somebody passed away, and it would toll the number of years that that person lived, and we would count them and see how old that person was when he died or she died. I had a girlfriend called Joanne Crank, and she lived up the way a little bit from me, and she was quite adventurous, and I was quite shy. But for some reason, we decided to go pick up the cigarette stubs that the men discarded before they went into church and try smoking. So we would, can you believe this? So we would go and pick up these stubs, and then we would take them to her basement so we could experiment on smoking. Well, my sister found out this, and she was going to tell Mother that I was doing this. And I was so scared of what Mother would do to me. And rather than have Eris tell her, I decided to confess to Mother my sin. So I remember going into the living room we had there, And getting down on my knees, she was sitting in a chair and asking her forgiveness. That was my experimentation with smoking. This girl was only a friend of mine in those years. When we went to junior high, she no longer was my friend because she hung around the uptown kids that had a little more money than what my folks could afford at that time. They would go out after school to get a ice cream cone or something like that, or a Coca-Cola, and I just didn't have that kind of money. The next place I'd like to share is called the Lawler House. I mean, not the Lawler House, but the Lawler House, which we had lived in, which was with the inner door bed, was sold, and so we moved it to this place, 1920 Avenue I. It was near the Lutheran Church. In fact, a couple of doors away. The parsonage was right next to the church. And Mother says both girls were in high school. Here's where we lived when Milton was baptized. He also learned to ride a bicycle. Oh, the other was a tricycle. I'm sorry. This was a bicycle. We had our one and only fireplace here. I don't ever remember us ever having a fireplace in there, but we felt quite uptown by having a fireplace there. At this particular home, Eris and I, our bed was in the unfinished attic. And so being unfinished, we could really hear the rain when it came on the roof. There was nothing up there but just the roof, you know. And then the side walls were, they were just unfinished too. And there was a space between where the roof ended and the side wall started that a bird got down in there once. And I could hear it, and I knew there was no way of rescuing it. And it really bothered me quite a bit that I couldn't rescue that bird. There was also a place up there where we had kind of a little vanity type thing, and it wasn't all that bad. My Aunt Pearl had the only finished room upstairs. I remember her wallpapering it and Mother actually wallpapered it, and I made curtains for it, and it was quite a cozy little room. But Eris and I slept in this double bed in the unfinished part of the home. This was the home that we lived in when I started playing the piano at church when I was 13. And it was the first wedding I ever played for, was my Aunt Pearl and Uncle Fisher's wedding. And Mother made a special dress for me, and I felt very grown up. I don't remember being particularly nervous playing for it. Probably a little bit too young to be nervous. But anyway, that was the first wedding that I had ever played for since then. Also, I remember about this place, I mowed the yard out in front. Probably wasn't a very big yard, but I mowed the yard. I also remember it had a basement, and women in those days prided themselves on how much they canned and put up, quote, food for the winter. And Mother had shelves down there where she had these canned goods, home canned green beans and cherries and peaches. She never canned meats particularly, or corn, but jellies, jams, and all that stuff, and it was all lined up so nice and neat on the shelf. We had a rocking chair at that time, and I think eventually Linda got that rocking chair. I remember taking it down to the basement and giving it a varnish job. That was good. Oh, and another thing about the basement was Mother pickles down there. And we would go down there and push the pickles underneath the brine. And that brings back another memory of the 2511 home. Mother would put grapes out on the back porch that we had there in a cheesecloth, I believe it was, and let it drip down into this pan, and then she would make jelly out of grape jelly out of it. I remember going and giving that cheesecloth a squeeze with my hands. Probably my hands weren't the cleanest thing in the world, but I remember that I would squeeze that and get some more juice out of them. Now a few more memories about the 1920 Avenue I place that was near the Lutheran church. I babysat their children, and I think that I got the total of about 25 cents for a night of babysitting. But 25 cents meant quite a bit. Now continuing on, when the 1920 Avenue I place was sold, we moved to the Dawson House, 2419 Avenue I. Mother says both girls were courted and married while we lived here. We graduated from high school and Graceland College, and we were alone except for one chick and Grandma Kelly. We used to have a large porch. The picture that she gave me is minus that large porch in front and around the west side. She says they spoiled it when they removed the porch, and I totally agree with her. It wasn't the house that I remember at all. And lived here 9 years. At this home, Grandma Kelly's bedroom was on the west side, and then there was a little door that went into attic portion. And the clock that I have, the turn of the century clock, was left there, and the folks bought it from the owner, and also got from him these gold scales that weighed gold. He was one of those adventuresome souls that went up to go on to Alaska to gold mine, and got cold feet when I got to Alaska and never did do it. But I had those gold scales. Dad gave them to me, but they were taken when we had the break-in at our home. This was the home where I had my high school years, and was involved in playing the piano at church, and also playing for the Boys Glee Club at school, singing in the mixed chorus, in the Girls Glee Club, mixed madrigal group, a sextet group. I did a lot of singing in those days, and I really regret losing the voice that I once possessed at that time. We still walked to school, and we would come home for lunch. I never did eat in a school cafeteria. I do remember in my high school years of having a cooking course where it seemed like all I really learned was how to make white sauce, and that was to be added to whatever mixture they decided to put in it, tuna or whatever, for the lunch. I didn't learn much beyond that. It was at this other 1920 Avenue I place near the Lutheran church that I took a sewing class in 7th and 8th grade, and I made a dress, and it was my first project, I believe. Maybe I made an apron before that, but the dress concentrated on was wanting to be just real perfect when I got through with it. Well, it had puff sleeves in it, and when I held it up to look at it, I had mounted the puff sleeve upside down. I think Mother had quite a laugh out of it. It was also where I made a blouse. It was a very pretty blouse with polka dots on it, and really a pretty one. Well, I was sitting at the dining room table one night doing homework, and so concentrating, I started scratching. I was wearing the blouse at the time, and started scratching my back. Well, lo and behold, the dots came off of it. I was so upset I never could wear it after that. Well, those are the homes that I lived in. I still want to tell you about the schools that I went to, and sort of recall too then about the different places as I remember them. But that's a list of the homes. Up and let your dad go ahead with his little remembrances of his childhood.
After I got my first bike and a paper route, I guess I was about 10 or 12. Some of my buddies in school and I, for entertainment, rigged up little clothespins on our handlebars. We went to a garage where they replaced inner tubes in truck tires, and we talked the owner into giving us the old tubes. We cut them into thick rubber bands and then shot them at each other as we rode all over town. One neat place was the local lumberyard, where we had many battles riding between stacks of pine-smelling lumber. Of course, we got run out of there several times. But boys will be boys. So we would return and do it again when the owner was not obviously present. I may have related some of my antics to you previously, but at least when you get old like us, you'll have it straight from the horse's mouth of my growing up years. Lamoni was a stop for the Jefferson bus line between Des Moines and Kansas City. It was a curiosity-seeking event to go to the local drugstore called Jones Drugstore and a bus stop to see who was coming in or who was leaving town on the bus. Many Graceland students arrived by way of the bus. We always had a car, so we seldom got to ride the bus. But in the winter, when snow came, the buses were sometimes late if the roads didn't get plowed. I think it was Ed Hammer and I who latched on to the rear bumper of the bus with a rope tied to our sleds as the bus left the drugstore. We would hang on for dear life until it got to the corner just outside of town where it had to slow down. And then we'd let go of the rope or let go of our hands on someplace on the bus and get a big thrill out of that free ride. I recall another indelible experience when I had my paper route. I was in competition with some other paper boys in town to see how many new subscribers I could get and who had the largest route. We would get bonuses or prizes for additional subscribers, so we worked hard at it. My route covered all parts of town, and when the bus got in, we would be ready to pick up and fold our newspapers, no rubber bands in those days, in a way that they would stay together folded after we threw them on the porches. I used to time myself to see how fast I could complete my route so I'd have more time to do sports or play with my buddies. There was an old folks' home in Lamoni on the west end of town. It's operated by the church for church members who didn't have a place to go and didn't have relatives to take care of them. They called them old folks' home before they started calling them convalescent homes. I sold a few of the residents there a subscription to the Des Moines Tribune. One old gent took a liking to me and could almost set his watch by my arrival with his paper. It must have been the end of my route there at the home, because he always detained me and wanted to visit with me and show me things he made. Give me a cookie or a piece of candy so I would talk with him. As I remember, he was single and somewhat crippled and had no family. He was either in bed or in a wheelchair. His hobby was tatting, not crocheting, but fine stitches made into doilies and napkins and things such as bookmarks. The phone just rang. Anyway, he was an artist at his craft, and he shared everything he made. He sold some of those things for a small price or gave them away to people all over town. His name was Mr. Hawley, and he had quite an impact upon my growing years, and probably was an influence on my compassion to get along with the elderly people as I matured. I have fond memories of my high school and Graceland years in sports. I made my dad and mother proud as they loyally supported our football and basketball games. We had no school buses back then, maybe a few to bring the farm kids to town to school, but on our away games, and we traveled as much as 50 or 75 miles sometimes to compete with another neighboring town. Well, our parents and boosters provided the cars to get us back and forth to the games. My dad never missed a game I played in, and he always drove with a car full of players. At our high school class reunions, and we have them about every 2 or 3 years for the past 58 years, we reminisce about our achievements and compare physical and mental limitations today, hoping this will not be the last reunion for those of us who gather together for the reunion. Well, the most indelible memory that I have is the football record we established in 1941, my senior year. As seniors on a winning team, several of we survivors, even as I speak today, are proud of the record set that year when we scored 326 points for the season to our opponent's 6 points for an undefeated football season. That record still stands today in the archives of Lamoni High School. This is just a side story of football that year concerning your dad. I was playing in position. I did play center sometime during high school, but this year I played end. Back then, it was legal if all the players were not in the huddle when the next play was called. Today it isn't. Anyway, on a kickoff by the opponents, they kicked the ball to us. The ball receiver ran to one side of the field before he was tackled. Immediately they called the next play. I wasn't in the huddle, but I was over on the opposite side of the field, laying down low, hiding, you might say. At the snap of the ball, I raced downfield, unguarded, and caught a heck of a long pass for a touchdown. Of course we won the game. All of them that year. Now, a little about my genealogy. Your dad was very fortunate to have had two pairs of parents. He was unfortunate in that he never had the opportunity to know his biological mother or grow up with his two sisters and one brother. As I have related to you, my children, before, the connection between the Newberry and the Downey families was quite complex. You children in today's world are fortunate to have been born and raised by a single marriage relationship. As parents and grandparents yourselves, can you imagine the responsibility and the sorrow of one of you being left with a 5-day-old baby, a 16-month-old baby, a 3-year-old, and a 5-year-old without a mother? I was fortunate to have been born and survive under such conditions that unfortunately ended my mother's life, but in a close-knit town where a loving couple who were childless accepted me and raised me as though I was their own flesh and blood, and who later became related through marriage to my biological father. Unfortunately, again, this couple, as well as my biological father, who was of a quiet nature, withheld from me the fact that I was adopted until I was informed through others. Now, I hold no malice toward any of the three of them, because I understand as a father the love they had for me. I will always regret, however, that due to the influence of my biological father's second wife upon him, and mother of my 3 half-sisters and half-brother, I never had the opportunity to learn from my biological father much about the mother who brought me into this world. My dad's second wife, Opal, as you remember, was a good mother to her own kids, but apparently resented him from telling the other 3 of his kids, the first 3, much about our mother. Now, if you remember, Charlotte was 15 months old, 16. Wayne was the oldest, as I spoke, and then Juanita. Well, Charlotte was too young for our father to take care of, so she was raised listen to this closely, she was raised by the sister of our father, Grandpa Newberry's sister. Her name was Eva. Her name was Eva, and she, believe it or not, was married to a man that was a half-brother of my adopted father, Ed Downey. His name was Art Downey. So Charlotte was never adopted, but Art Downey and Eva Newberry Downey raised her after I was adopted. Nevertheless, you kids ended up with 3 pairs of grandparents. I often wish that I had had the opportunity of being back in Iowa while my biological father was still alive, so I could go out alone with him and get him to tell me more about the mother that bore me. One time I was back there with the mother, and I did get him in the car for a ride. He was a stay-at-home Iowa farmer, as you remember, and he didn't like to leave the town very far away. But we went out to where I was born, out in the country, and he showed me the place that the house is no longer there, but showed me the proximate place that I was born. And I got to visit with him, which I'm very pleased to have had.